On this edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling, I'll be joined by a special guest, Eddie DiOrio, as he stops by to talk about his thoughts on the upcoming WrestleMania card and the world of wrestling in general. That's all to come on this upcoming edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. And welcome to another edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. I'm your host, Sean Meyers, and another week, another special guest. Today, for the first time, joined by my co-host, Eddie DiOrio. Eddie is a broadcast colleague of mine who I've known for a handful of years. Thank you for taking the time to do this. And I know you actually reached out to me when I put the tweet out that we would be wrapping up the podcast right around WrestleMania time this year, marking our 2-year anniversary. You said I'd like to be on, so we made it happen here. I'm glad to have you. And like I do with all the guests that I have on for the first time, just want to get a quick background. How did you become a wrestling fan? What got you into it? What are some maybe memorable aspects of you watching professional wrestling growing up?
Well, you see, a lot of things that people get into when they were younger, at least, my age, close to our age, when they were kids. I mean, WWE is very well associated with children and families in general. I never was into that when I was a kid. That wasn't something I didn't get into until I actually got to college. A lot of my buddies at school are wrestling fans, and freshman year when we were all starting to kind of get integrated and as a group of friends or whatever, they'd watch pay-per-views, and I always knew things like the very generics about wrestling, whether it was the Royal Rumble or John Cena and all that, but I never watched it really. But then the more and more, my friends are pretty stubborn. They say, hey, this is what we want to watch, and you're in our room, we're watching it. So I kind of got into it by accident, I want to say, just by watching it because it's what was on the television and what everyone was into. I just kept asking questions. And at first I really was, I don't want to say against it, but I thought it was very predictable. But then
you and a lot of fans today would certainly all be on the same page with that.
Yes, but once you get past that and realize that it's not about the sporting aspect of it, it really is an entertainment business, especially in the terms of WWE and any other wrestling independent. But once you get past that, it's really something cool because it really takes everything that we love about natural, non-scripted sports, and you can write your own stories with who you want to write them about and who's popular amongst your fans and everything. And I really find that to be cool. Plus, I think that wrestling, talking about it, talking about reaching out to you, I've watched a few episodes of this, and, you guys and maybe bigger things like Cultaholic or What Culture Wrestling or things like that, there's not really much of a difference. It's all about opinions of what they should do with who and where they should go with certain venues and whatnot. Like, you don't have to be a certain expert of expertise to just have a talk show about wrestling.
Although really I certainly am an expert, right? You would agree with that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, good.
No doubt about it.
Good.
I wouldn't call myself that, but hey, now that I've made my first appearance on the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling, I don't know, maybe you could say that.
Credibility's going up at least.
Hey, that's all we're looking for. But yes, I at the end of the day, I mean, it's something I've certainly got to know and love more over the past few years. And when you gain that initial interest, it makes you want to go back and kind of see how things progressed. And so I've caught up on things like the Attitude Era and the Ruthless Aggression Era. I love the series that they're doing now on the network. And it's really cool to watch. It's really something neat. It's just different. There's nothing else like it in the world of entertainment. So I've really come to like it after kind of being forced into it.
And so just to add to that background, you were what, 20 or 21 now?
I'm 21 now, yeah, but I was 18 freshman year of college whenever I first started.
And so you were born, was it in 2000 or 99?
1998.
I'm really bad at math apparently, right?
No, yeah, but I would have been born right either in the middle of the Attitude Era and then, as I was getting into my childhood, it would have been the start of the Ruthless Aggression.
And so you mentioned that your friends sort of got you into it there at Waynesburg. And it seems like everyone that I meet that's in journalism at Waynesburg is a wrestling fan. I think that's the case with almost every single one that I've met for whatever reason. But I know you said your friends sort of got you into that within the last 2 or 3 years. What ultimately did you remember seeing and saying, yeah, this is kind of interesting? Was there something that stood out? Was there a particular superstar or a storyline or even a pay-per-view event?
Elimination Chamber 2000, that would have been, 18. Elimination Chamber 2018, when it was, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to try to remember the field off the top of my head. It was Elias, Cena, Reigns, Strowman. I'm trying to think, was The Miz in there maybe? I'm trying to think. But
all that matters is Elias was in there to me.
Yes, that is true. But
did Roman win it?
What's that?
Did Roman win it?
Yes, he did.
Okay.
And so, but before then, Strowman, I think, eliminated everyone. I think he eliminated every single star before that, and it came down to Strowman and Reigns. And my one friend at school, God bless him, he was so into it that when Reigns beat Strowman on one spear, I think it was, to win the chamber match and go on to face Brock that year in main event Mania 34, he got so mad that his roommate left halfway through the year. But he didn't take. So there was just a mattress in the room that he lived single for the spring semester. So he just had a spare mattress that he didn't use. So whenever Reigns won that match, he took the mattress and he threw it out the window of the dorm. And I remember thinking to myself, not only was that hilarious, but man, he must have been really invested for that to happen. And that kind of sparked my curiosity of how can someone get that invested in something that is scripted?
Right. And it's funny because in Vince McMahon's mind, he wants the people to cheer for Roman winning, and your friend was obviously doing the opposite.
Yeah, that was super Roman push, but now looking back on it, but that's when I started asking questions. I'm like, why does that not make sense? Why does it? And I'm like, and he told me, he's like, in reality, Strowman is 6'8", 385 pounds, beats everybody, and then Reigns beats him on one spear. That doesn't make sense. And I'm like, yeah, doesn't make sense. And then that's just where the curiosity built, and I started asking more questions, get more into it, and soon enough, I'm a fan. So I'm glad. It's a really neat thing to get into.
And so I appreciate your perspective because it's different than a lot of the other people. Myself and Justin have been watching. I can speak to basically 1990 and on from when I was a fan. So I was about 5 or 6 years old. So, I mean, that's legitimately 30 years at this point. That's a long time. And we've had Rennie Detour on. We've had Bobby O on. They go back even further than myself. I think Rennie is mid-'80s and Bobby O's maybe late 70s, if not early 80s. So a lot of these people that I talk to, they've been lifelong wrestling fans. So they've seen everything. And I think inherently there may be a little bit more cynical with stuff like that. Whereas newer fans, I don't want to say that they're not cynical or not critical of stuff, but they just have a different perspective. So you've done your history, your research, as you said, going back and watching stuff retroactively. Give me your thoughts on when you go back and watch wrestling from 15, 20 years ago, whether it just be a documentary or if you watch old pay-per-views, anything like that, compared to what you've seen over a year or 2 or 3 years watching it. Do you notice a significant difference right away? And is there one that you kind of prefer, or is it just a change of the times that's cyclical?
The biggest thing that I've noticed is that from the Attitude Era to now, the in-ring abilities of the wrestlers is unmatched now. You weren't getting, the only way you were getting a 5-star match in the Attitude Era, like a true, maybe, whatever your definition of a 5-star match is back then, you have to really tell a story and pay it off with the match. I think back to watching WrestleManias, and it was WrestleMania, I think it was, 17, and it was Shane and Vince. Was that match good by maybe technical terms? Absolutely not. But it was just such a good story told that makes it possibly an argumental 5-star match. Nowadays, you get takeovers that get 5-star matches because of the in-ring quality, plus the story might not be as good, or the rivalry might be too typical, but just the in-ring performances and the technical aspect of being a wrestler nowadays is just so much better. But the thing that lacks is there's not many characters anymore, at least that come out of whether it's 205 Live or NXT or wherever. You don't get many characters anymore, and I think
they're people basically who maybe have a slight persona, but they're not true characters. To your point,
correct?
They don't have the larger than life, gimmicks with the costumes and the music and stuff like that. They're kind of just people like you and I who become wrestlers. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Yes, it's essentially what I'm saying. And I like, talking about guys with no character, I think about wrestlers nowadays like Cedric Alexander. What is he? He can wrestle really well, but Buddy Murphy, is the same way. I like how they put him in a stable now or in a faction, but before then, what was he? There wasn't much to it. I know those are 205 Live guys, but think about, I know he's glorious, but what's Robert Roode?
Oh, I think people would have said the same thing about Seth Rollins until about 3 months ago.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're right. His mantra was based on the fact that he beat Triple H at a Mania, which made him the Kingslayer. And then before that, he was just, he was the architect, but what does that mean? He has the catchphrase. I think they're so hung up on catchphrases now, thinking that makes a character when it doesn't. I know The Rock made a living off of it, but there was just more to it there. You just get repetitive, and they talk about building characters and building stars, and we're obviously probably going to get into it with the whole Goldberg thing, but it's just, that's the biggest difference from now and then. It's that
I asked, I believe, maybe it was Rennie that I posed this question to back in the 80s. And I think predating that, the characters sort of, to me at least, really developed in the 70s and 80s. Because when you go back before that, it was kind of just somewhat similar to what it is now. Just guys wrestling, basically. Mm-hmm. But you get the characters, and of course that was all WWF was back in the 80s and into the 90s, was these ridiculous characters, whether you're a Mountie or you're an alligator man like Skinner, all these ridiculous things. But wrestling then, I think fans were not very educated or certainly well read on what's happening in wrestling. They are now. They know everything that goes on. They know about these people. So a guy comes to WWE, let's say Damian Priest. Well, they know all about him because they can read about him coming up. They probably saw him wrestling independently. They saw him in Ring of Honor as Punishment Martinez, all these different things. So you know who the real person is, in a sense. Mm-hmm. And so how do you believe when he has this absurd character? I think that it's the skepticism of fans that make it really tough to have characters now, because you have to make everyone somewhat believable, right? You can't have these off-the-wall, ridiculous, hokey gimmicks anymore because they won't work with how fans are.
The biggest thing now is that, as compared to back then you were talking about, I think that back then there were still people that didn't think kayfabe was a thing. They thought it was legit. And I think
wrestlers, they weren't, the good guys weren't hanging out with the bad guys if they went out somewhere, stuff like that.
Correct. And the fights were legitimate, and this is, you could categorize it as 1970s, 1960s UFC. But it's just different. And we now know that wasn't the case back then, but back then they didn't have social media or anything, as many things as we have today, to where it comes to knowing wrestlers, whether it's during their time with the company or even before they get there. I think that Vince saw that, and then going into the 80s, he could make more money if it was more of an entertainment value as far as building up these characters that are larger than life. And example, A, B, C, D, and the rest of the alphabet, Hulk Hogan, that's what the company just was, a rocket ship, and it's just shot off after that. It was just, and from then on, you have so many new characters, and I think that, you hear it all the time about building new ones, and it's not easy, but it's almost like there's how they're booked, and there's how they get over with the fans, and there's just such a different dynamic nowadays with how social media is. Becky Lynch got herself over. Half of the reason she got over, I think, is because of how active she was on Twitter during her whole run from the summer of 18 and up until WrestleMania of 19. I think
it honestly helped too that fans realized that the company was favoring Charlotte over her, because that made them turn on Charlotte and support Becky.
Absolutely. And I think they're kind of taking that same I don't want to say they're taking that same angle now with Ripley, but we all know that, Ripley's I don't want to say the no-namer in that match, but it's Charlotte. Who's
Right.
going to, if you're not Lynch or even Rousey, who's going to be a bigger name than that? So, if you're Ripley, you could easily take, and I think they're trying to, that underdog angle of, hey, we're NXT, but that doesn't mean you're better than us. And I think they took that at Survivor Series and it worked really well. And I think they're going to continue that same angle going into WrestleMania with Charlotte and Rhea. I've read certain things and certain reports that say that could be a triple threat with Bianca, and I would not be opposed to that. But I think that kind of takes away from the whole Rumbles. You get your one-on-one match.
I agree. I would agree with that. If you win the Rumble, that should be it. It shouldn't be muddied. They at times muddied the waters. Remember, it was even if you go back to WrestleMania 20, Chris Benoit, Triple H, they throw Shawn Michaels in there, and they did the same when Daniel Bryan was added, and that's what the fans wanted. But a lot of times they have changed the course of what the storyline was supposed to be based on the Rumble. In this case, I don't think it's necessary. But I do want to kind of focus on something you said about struggling to build stars. So I think the biggest talk, and we're doing this on a Tuesday afternoon, about 9 or 10 days ago, they had their Super Showdown in Saudi Arabia. And I'm going to be honest, I think I watched the first ever show over in Saudi Arabia, and I have not watched them since. And that's not necessarily because I'm boycotting it for a political stance. But I watch so much wrestling and so many other things that every single week I watch Raw, whether it's live or usually DVR. Every single week I watch SmackDown. I'm running behind on NXT, but I'm going to get caught up on every single episode. But some things I just don't have time for, and that's kind of one that I've chosen I don't need to watch. I don't know what your take on it is, but to me it's a bizarro type of show anyway, because they go over in front of fans who seemingly are really not that up on the product. As far as I can tell, it seems like the Prince is stuck in 1998 with what he likes to see. They bring back all these part-timers. The matches really are inconsequential, but I think what they've tried to do the last couple times is they have big developments. We saw Bray Wyatt win the title there from Seth Rollins last time. Well, now he loses it. Okay, whatever, but the person he lost it to is Bill Goldberg. And this is just a lightning rod. So Goldberg is now the Universal Champion. And it's hard to understand for people who watch each and every week why a guy like Goldberg can come back, cut one promo saying I'm going for the title, then win the title against, based on what we were talking about with characters, one of the best characters this company has seen in 10 or 20 years in Bray Wyatt. And a person who still, while he's extremely over, needs career-defining victories like this, where Goldberg certainly does not need a victory. So, your reaction to Goldberg defeating Bray Wyatt and now entering WrestleMania as one of the two biggest champions in the entire company?
They could have went two different ways about this as far as protecting Bray and that character. You build that character since the Raw after WrestleMania last year, and you finally get the payoff at SummerSlam, and he's over like Rover. And that was big, considering how Moxley had just gone to AEW. Moxley was the hottest thing in wrestling in general, and WWE needed to respond, and they did with The Fiend. But he should have never been in the title picture. Never should have been.
I thought him and Seth Rollins was a bit premature. I thought that they threw Wyatt into that way too quickly, because he was only, 2 months in, he beat Finn Balor in a feud, and then he was on to Seth Rollins.
Because Hell in a Cell was coming up, and they had. I mean, that's. I understand from a marketing standpoint, and as far as selling the pay-per-view, you want to see Bray Wyatt in Hell in a Cell in that character, but at the same time, that didn't have to be a title match. It could have been against someone else. Once he got the title, everyone was relieved because it was off of Rollins, and it just helped the Fiend even more. But then nobody really thought, wait a minute, he's not Bruno Sammartino. This may be a larger than life character, but it's not going to hold it for 2+ years.
Right. He was destined to lose it at the latest by WrestleMania this year.
I think most people were expecting Roman to beat him.
Yes.
But
Which
so then
I
what
think
happened?
would have not been a great WrestleMania match in its own right. Not that it wouldn't be a fine in-ring performance, but there's a lot of issues with booking Roman to defeat Bray Wyatt at WrestleMania this year as well. They're falling in the same trap that they had with Roman previously.
Yes, and I think with Roman not being in the title picture for how long he has not been in there, I think it's really gotten him over. I think a lot of people are starting to. I think more people are starting to like Reigns just because he's not being pushed so heavily. And I think now's the time for him to come back and get the title that he never lost. And I think you can make a good story out of that. And I think they will, but if they don't focus too much on spear versus spear, by goodness. I mean, but if you wanted to keep momentum on both Reigns and Wyatt's side, considering they're both full-timers, you don't pin them against each other. I didn't think. So I think one way or another, you had to have those two separated, whether it's for a title or not. I like the matchups they have. I do. I like Goldberg, Reigns, and I like Cena and Wyatt. If you really, I think, like, let's say they keep the title on Wyatt and they do what they did, right? It is what it is. Cena goes after the 17th record-breaking championship against the newly invented Bray Wyatt, right? That story writes itself.
I think people would buy Cena chasing a title at WrestleMania a lot better than they would have Goldberg going in as a champion at WrestleMania. Because Cena, as polarizing as he is, people realize this guy's, very legitimate still, and it's more so he's like The Rock 2.0, not a has-been that's coming back just to collect a paycheck.
Yeah, it's a Saudi paycheck. And Cena's not going over there again. He's made that very clear. And, I think that, you talk about career-defining wins. I don't know if I would have called it a career-defining win because Goldberg's, I think, a has-been, and he's collecting a paycheck. If it was a WrestleMania match, then, yeah, I would have said that if Wyatt beats Goldberg there, that's career-defining. If he does it at a Saudi pay-per-view, meh.
Right.
I don't because you knew that match wasn't going to go long. You knew that wasn't Goldberg at his best, and you knew that you kind of assumed that he was going to steamroll the roster until WrestleMania. But he didn't. He lost. So I think that you still have, when it goes back to the whole start of the conversation of building characters, you still have Wyatt, I think, I don't want to say a good place, but this doesn't kill him. A lot of people are saying this kills him again, but I don't think it does. Because everybody knew that eventually he was going to have to lose it. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, even Wyatt has addressed this on social media saying that, Goldberg wasn't a past thing that the Fiend had to go, or Bray Wyatt himself had to go through. That's the point of this whole character, is that he's avenging everyone and everything that's wronged him before. He's gone through Bryan. He's now going to go through Cena. And,
And John Cena holds a WrestleMania victory over Bray Wyatt when Bray was early in his career, and a lot of people thought that did harm to him at the time, which I think you could argue. So
if you're right. So if the Fiend wins, then I think that brings back that momentum. He, like you said, he's still over. Whenever the lights started going out on the Cena segment last Friday, it was real. People still love this character. And if he wins this match, I think it's pretty easy to say that he's still okay. I don't think it killed the character completely, but it really does look bad on the company's part, because I understand that it's about pay-per-view buys and Goldberg.
But how condemning is it to say that Goldberg and John Cena are these massive draws more so than any current guy? Isn't that a problem?
Of course it's a problem. But I think that, you have to have the same, I tell you what, the same people that are mad about Goldberg winning over Bray for the title are the same people who were upset that Kurt Angle lost to Baron Corbin in his retirement match. And I guarantee you people will say, well, nobody likes Baron Corbin. That's the point. He's a heel. You're putting over a younger star. And now Corbin is arguably the second biggest heel on SmackDown, I think.
He is very much a true heel. I've made the argument. I actually think he's pretty solid in the ring. And I don't mind his matches for the most part. But I will say, in any form of entertainment, I understand there's villains, and the goal is to make the good guy even more popular by pitting them against this bad guy in Baron Corbin. I think that works to an extent, but I also think when Baron Corbin comes out, there's a large part of me that says I'm not super interested in this, no matter who he's working with, because I just don't find him very charismatic. But I do also kind of see the side of it where, like, oh, well, everyone else is being a cool heel. They want to get secretly cheered. That's not really how it's supposed to work. I just think the most entertaining people, whether they are entertaining with their in-ring style or their work on the mic or whatever, that's what I enjoy watching. I don't find him entertaining, while I can still admit that he does his job well and probably does it better than anyone else in the eyes of Vince McMahon.
Yeah. So I think that ultimately it's just going to be a whole different dynamic that you're going to have to watch out for if you're AEW too, because you got all these old WWE guys, and if you keep, I think Moxley's win on Saturday was very well deserved,
and he defeated an old WWE guy, if you will, in a sense, in Chris Jericho.
Absolutely,
yeah.
And now there's all these reports about Hardy, going there, and I think that you do need these older guys and these more famous names and faces to do this. And everyone's talking about you got to build these former stars, but they're literally just putting out a documentary about how they had to do that at one time, and they did it. I don't know if I want to say well, but Batista, Cena, Orton, Brock Lesnar, even. It's they built these guys. They built a new roster, and it's worked. And now they're the ones. Cena's considered a part-time. Orton, I know he's still full-time, but when he's out, that'll be a big name. Batista was a big draw last year. We're seeing Edge now. It's
interesting because I was thinking of WrestleMania. If you were just to say the biggest matches at WrestleMania, and let's be honest, like, while they're going to put a focus on the women's matches, I think if you really say what are really the biggest matches, it's probably 4 or 5 of the men's matches, right? It's not like Ronda and Becky and Charlotte like last year. The women's matches are really secondary. So the biggest matches are what? Goldberg versus Roman Reigns, a part-timer. Brock Lesnar versus Drew McIntyre, a part-timer. John Cena versus The Fiend Bray Wyatt, a part-timer. Edge versus Randy Orton, a part-timer. So, and I think there's probably another match that I'm even forgetting at this point. So you look at the 4 biggest matches, they all involve a part-timer, Undertaker versus AJ Styles, a part-timer. So your 5 matches involve part-timers, in a couple cases with Goldberg and The Undertaker, guys who are clearly past their prime and cannot work really even a passable match at this point. I get doing that once or twice at WrestleMania. I think this year is probably as bad or worse than any other time in that regard, though, that all of the big matches have someone that they're bringing back because they don't have enough faith in 2 current, active, everyday superstars on the roster.
Yeah, there's that side of the coin, but there's the other side of it that, if they're, there's guys that, don't put it past them already, I should say, but, there's guys who can't go anymore, I don't think, and guys like Ric Flair, guys like Hulk Hogan. I think that, WWE knows that those two, they can only bring them out for appearances anymore. They can't wrestle them anymore, I don't think. Maybe on Hulk's side, I'm not too sure. But anyway,
there has to be a fear that Ric Flair would legitimately die during a match. He's
absolutely
been close, much like they won't let Jerry Lawler wrestle, thankfully.
And I think that they know that they're getting the last bits out of these guys. And I think it goes on to the other wrestlers, too. I know it's a payday, but you know yourself better than anyone. And I think on the parts of Goldberg and Undertaker and Edge, and I think they know that they can still go. And we all know Cena can, but I think that the biggest thing is why not use these guys if they're willing to be used while you can. And how much are you really going to sell a pay-per-view like to that magnitude as opposed to stomping grounds? That's where you can pin current against current, and it gives more importance to those pay-per-views as well. Like, I tell you what, for Elimination Chamber, as meaningless as that's going to be, I'm actually excited to see Black and Styles for real this time. I think that's going to be, and a big thing is that, wrestling fans aren't dumb for the most part. They know what they want to see. And so, we get that at the other big 3 pay-per-views. Your SummerSlam matches are usually dream matches for the full-timers. You get maybe some part-timers here and there, and I understand that that's what WrestleMania is about. But I think that, Kevin Owens is a big name. If Kevin Owens went away and came back, he'd get a massive pop. If I don't think about Reigns last year with cancer, and he came back, and when he said, "I'm in remission," y'all, that was one of the best live reactions I think we've seen this. I shouldn't say this decade because that was last decade, but within the last 10 years. And I think last night with Orton's segment with Beth Phoenix, I know Orton's not going to be around too much longer, but that was a heck of a segment too. I don't have as much doubt as maybe other people do when it comes to their ability to maybe rebrand and build these stars back up with how many part-timers are in the mix right now.
I think for me, the concern is if you're the type of person who maybe similar to you a couple years ago, hey, come over, watch WrestleMania. My friends and I are all getting it. Come over and check it out. Oh, I'm not a big wrestling fan, but all right, it's WrestleMania. I'll come watch it. When you watch something like that, if you really think, hey, this is an entertaining show, I'm going to start tuning into Raw and SmackDown. The problem is you're not going to see half of those guys on Raw and SmackDown a couple weeks later. You're going to say, well, where's Goldberg? Where's Brock Lesnar? Where's John Cena? And when you don't get those, are you able to retain fans beyond WrestleMania? I understand it's the culmination of a whole year, and then you sort of start from scratch and you introduce new people. But to me, my concern is I don't think – who's the biggest star in WWE right now? The full-timer. Roman Reigns?
Full-time? Biggest stars? I'd say either Reigns or Lynch, probably.
Those are pretty big names, but they're nowhere close to recognizable by all people, wrestling fans and not, like a John Cena or a Rock or things like that. When you look at the pinnacle of WWE, when it was WWF at the time, you had a Hulk Hogan or you had a Stone Cold or a Rock, or even to some degree a John Cena or The Undertaker. I think those people are recognizable. You put them on social media memes or whatever, everyone knows, hey, that's Ric Flair, that's Hulk Hogan, that's whomever, that's The Rock. You put other people like a Seth Rollins or Roman Reigns or Becky Lynch, I don't think they have that appeal.
No, and that's certainly a different thing to look at because, it is all about what you see on social media nowadays. And I think that, you don't get those moments of chaos that could spread nationally outside of the wrestling world per se. I don't think you get I don't know. And it goes back to what
was
you can
Roman
do
Reigns a name you really even knew very well before you got kind of pulled in?
I'd seen him on on some commercials and stuff like that. I've seen him, but right. I didn't know him by name. I'll put it that way. And right. I think that, but I tell you what, you talk about maybe buying in for a big 4 paper or the Rumble. I think a lot of people buy in for the Rumble just because. I think a lot of people just know what the Rumble is just because.
Right.
I think
it sells itself. Yeah.
Right. So when non-fans watch that and then they're like, hey, I might want to get into this. And then, like you said, they watch the Raw the next night or the SmackDown. You might not see whoever it may be, whether it's Edge or, he did come out the next night, but my point, you may not see all the biggest stars that night or that specific episode, but you might find someone that interests you in general. I remember thinking, going back to my Elimination Chamber story, I had no idea who Braun Strowman was, but the dude's just massive. And he's just like a larger than life figure in itself. I know he's misused all the time, but it's about, some people just get over because I think that if somebody watched Kevin Owens cut a promo as a face, you'd think it's funny and maybe you'd get into him. Right. It's about personal preference, and I know it all blends together to determine who's over and who's not. But I think that that with given, I mean, all the television time that these full-time guys are given, these main event type caliber people, these part-timers do need to have maybe a little bit more of a retracted role, but I don't think that it's really taking away that much in the grand scheme of things if they come up for one feud, for one big pay-per-view. But these Saudi shows are certainly hurting because it's all about the money, and that's what they can provide, and that's how they can get these many part-timers to come back.
Right.
Sooner or later you're going to see Edge wrestling on these shows, or my one friend said Stone Cold if his neck was good enough, or even Sting and stuff like that. I just don't want to see that.
I think Sting actually probably will happen, it seems like, and that's scary, isn't it? Like I'm a little iffy about Edge coming back in wrestling.
Yeah, and that's not even a Saudi show. But yeah, Sting, it's not that you don't want to see them. It's that you don't want to see them wrestle. That's the biggest thing. And you don't want to see them potentially on every hit hurt themselves, and that's.
It would be like, do people really want to see Ryan Shazier play for the Steelers again?
That's a great example. It's like every tackle you're going to cringe a little bit, or every bump you're going to take, in a ring, you're going to like,
and just when saying like, is it worth it?
Yeah. Inevitably is Edge and Orton, like, how much am I actually going to watch that? I was watching the Rumble and every spear he hit or every time Edge took a bump, I got scared.
And I'm sure they'll play that up at Mania. Definitely.
Oh, yeah.
In the match itself, we're going to see at some point Edge, and the announcers, Michael Cole, or I guess Phillips in this case, saying like, the neck, something like that. That to me is a storyline that people really have enjoyed heading into WrestleMania. I think there's a lot of momentum behind that, and it certainly added to it last night when Randy Orton gave the RKO to Beth Phoenix. Pretty obvious it was coming, but still something that WWE doesn't do very much in this new era, a man attacking a woman. So WrestleMania, we know a lot of the big matches, and you also mentioned Rhea Ripley and Charlotte, and I think pretty certainly we're going to get Becky Lynch and Shayna Baszler, which I think Becky's coming off as kind of annoying recently. I don't know what they're doing with her. But we know the big matches for the most part. Maybe one thing will change or something like that. What do you like? What don't you like about the WrestleMania card at this point?
One thing I love, or I should say I loved about how they went about one of these matches, and we've mentioned it multiple times already, Reigns and Goldberg, everyone and their mother thought that you were getting an Elimination Chamber match for the number one contender for the Universal Championship.
And that would be extremely predictable.
Right. Instead, Reigns just comes out and says, "Hey, let's cut the BS. I'm next."
Right. Didn't insult the fans. But it also raises the question, is it really, if you're trying to say it's a merit base for earning title shots, Goldberg just said, "Hey, I'm wrestling The Fiend for the title," and now Roman says, "Hey, I'm wrestling you." But I agree. Instead of drawing it out where it's a very obvious, which is what they're doing with Shayna Baszler in the Elimination Chamber, right?
Correct.
It seems like Asuka's maybe a little bit of a wrench in the plan, but it seems pretty clear what's going to happen there.
Do you really think that any member of the Riot Squad or Natalya is going to beat Shayna Baszler? No, you don't. And
I don't know. I mean, it could be Sarah Logan. She might go on to WrestleMania.
Yeah, you didn't see Sarah Logan go out and bite Becky Lynch's leg last week. Like Shayna Baszler's the only one that they've paid attention to in this whole thing with Lynch directly. So, it's just so predictable. I like the SmackDown tag being defended in an Elimination Chamber match, but the only thing is that the only two, and it's 3 too much if they're going to add one more main event level, or are the women going to main event? I'm sorry, but I don't think Sarah Logan, Liv Morgan, Ruby Riott, I don't think they deserve a main event match in any pay-per-view. That's just me. And I know it's paired up with Asuka and Natalya and Shayna, but that whole Elimination Chamber match has to be good or non-predictable. If you gave a match, and I understand that I loved Drew McIntyre winning the Rumble, but if you would have had an Elimination Chamber match between McIntyre, Orton, Rollins, Owens, Lashley, and maybe Rusev or someone else on Raw that's a believable face that could maybe face Brock for the title at Mania, Drew McIntyre is not a guaranteed pick in that, is he? That's a more believable winner, whoever wins it,
Right.
I think. So I think that while I'm not complaining, I love how they did it with McIntyre
And I
how
think what
done
they
it up.
did with him at the Rumble, and Rennie said this previously, is that's how you make a guy important. That's how you make a star heading into WrestleMania. And I think McIntyre, unlike some of the other guys in years past, that is something where they sort of did it. They gave him the momentum pretty late heading into WrestleMania season, where some guys we knew for a whole year they were getting him, pushing him constantly, and fans just get sick of it by that point. With Kofi Kingston, with Drew McIntyre, it was like 2 or 3 months of them getting hot. It wasn't a year-long WWE concerted effort at every turn to make them seem like a big star, because then fans almost turn on it. It's almost when they promote.
That's what happened to Seth Rollins.
Well. Yeah.
That's exactly what happened to Seth Rollins, and I hate it because I think Seth's obviously naturally better as a heel, but when he was IC face champion, he was the hottest thing on Raw. So I think that it's other matches. I mean, they've done it pretty well. The only one I'm hesitant about is Taker and Styles.
It doesn't seem to be necessary, and it's that's not a match people were ever clamoring for. I don't think ever.
It's not a dream match, but I think from what I've heard and from what I've read, that Taker requested Styles, and he thought that Styles is pretty much this generation's Shawn Michaels. And while I don't think that's completely true, it's a decent similarity. I'll give him that, but Taker's got to hold it up on his end too. Those are two of the best. I think the two best matches of Taker's career come to the hands of Mr. Michaels, but I don't think you're going to get that come early April. You saw it at Super Showdown.
I mean, it's probably got to be like 7 minutes, 8 minutes max.
And if you want the best AJ Styles match, that's not how you do it. You're not going to get the best out of it.
How many short, big-time matches might there be? The Goldberg match can't go long. And I'm starting to think with Lesnar, you never know with Brock Lesnar either. His matches. He can go 20 minutes with Drew. I think they'll probably make that one a little bit longer because some of the other ones have to be short. But it is very bizarre where 3 of the biggest matches you don't know are even going to go 8 minutes.
If I had to get, and it's funny because Triple H isn't in the field right now, and I don't think he's going to be.
Probably not, because he sees that there's too many other old timers coming back.
Yeah, he's the longest match always goes to him. But I think your candidates for that category would have to be. I think it's going to be Shane and Becky. You're going to go really long. If you eventually get Bayley and Sasha for the SmackDown title, I think that could go really long because their takeover match was just ungodly. And then with everything that you've been seeing from Brock's end in this whole feud with McIntyre, I think Brock really likes McIntyre and likes to sell for him. You saw it last night. There's been a lot of, if you didn't see it, go back and maybe watch it. Brock yells at Drew, pick up the title after he's Claymored him 3 times and sold it like a champ. At the Rumble when he got eliminated, he sold it like a champ. I think Brock really likes Drew as not only a coworker, but as a star. And so I think that Brock, when it comes to being willing to go 20 minutes with someone, I think Brock might be willing to go 20 minutes with McIntyre because it could be a really, really good match. And then I think Cena and Wyatt could go really long, but I don't know. That's interesting to think about too because,
hopefully it'll all lead to a slightly shorter show this year because I was at Mania last year. Pre-show started at 5 and it ended at 12:30. I would say 7.5 hours is. I would say 5 to 5.5 should be plenty. Once you get to 6 hours, that's just excess.
And they've done ever since Heyman really became more of a prominent role in the backstage area. I think they've done a really good job of timing out their pay-per-views so where they're not ungodly long. I mean, the Rumble,
but those aren't WrestleManias. I agree with that, but I think WrestleMania, they're dead set on getting every freaking person that's ever wrestled in the company on the show.
Well, you have to think about it too. Both world titles, both mid-card titles, both women's titles, the women's tag titles, Edge Orton, Cena Wyatt, Taker Styles. That's at least 10.
And Elias Performance probably.
The 2 battle royals, Elias. It's hard for me to believe that.
I don't know if you said it. Rollins Owens seems like a match too, right?
Rollins Owens. I'm pretty sure it's in their contracts that Shinsuke Nakamura and Rusev have to have a match every WrestleMania. Why I think that? Why the heck were they a tag team last year? I don't even know. But I think they'll be involved somehow, you know, with how much attention you've given them. How do you not give Lashley and Lana some sort of thing there?
Right.
Like it's going to be long. And I think that they can't afford to. People want to watch the entrances again when it comes to these part-timers. They want to watch everything around.
Right. Yeah,
they don't want to watch them wrestle. So I think it's okay if they only go 5 to 10 minutes each. I would not be surprised if Reigns and Goldberg is almost a carbon copy of Reigns and Goldberg and Lesnar from 33.
Right. Which I actually thought was appropriate. They didn't drag it out. They didn't expose Goldberg too much.
No, made him look good. You know, speared him through the barricade once, jackhammers, everything. Like it was. There were no other offensive moves made than finishers and signatures. You know, it's just. I think it's going to be interesting to see the timing. I think they're going to try and time it out a little bit better this year, but you know, I don't know. It'll be interesting also to see. I think that something I'm really getting sick of on TV, the U.S. title. I can't do it anymore with how, like, I'm seeing the same matches over and over again, just with different faces plugging in. And I mean, you think Reigns and Cena have had super runs. You'd think Humberto Carrillo was Hulk Hogan. I mean, he's getting every opportunity worth mentioning. And you want to talk about a guy that doesn't have a character? Oh my goodness. My one buddy calls him a Power Ranger. And I'm like, that's the best way to describe him.
Yep.
You know, So I think that I hope they don't get that too much more attention going into Mania season, but I mean it's going to be long. I hate to tell you, but how long? That's the real question. 7 hours isn't necessary, but hey, we'll both sit down and watch it. So
well, we don't want this podcast to go 7 hours, so we'll put a bow on it. But listen, I appreciate it. I was glad that you reached out to me to do this, and certainly good to get your insight and your unique perspective on the world of professional wrestling as well. That is Eddie DiOrio stepping in. You could follow him on Twitter. We had the Twitter handle up throughout, but if we'll throw it up one more time. There it is, Eddie DiOrio, and an aspiring journalist as well, doing a great job. As always, make sure you check him out there. You can also follow us, 5-Star Pod Wrestle on Twitter, Instagram, 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We'll be back with probably 3, maybe 4 more episodes before we put a end to the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. But in the meantime, feel free to check us out. You can go back and watch all the old videos. We have about 100 of them now on our YouTube channel, so definitely do that. And Eddie, thanks again for taking the time to do it.
Thank you, Sean.
All right, that is Eddie DiOrio. I'm Sean Meyers. We'll catch you again next week here on the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling.